Let's talk about EQing the drums. I want to kind of jump ahead a little bit and go back to the snare drum. One, I have decided to gate it. So if we listen to the snare soloed, so while a gated snare kind of sounds funny, once you add the overheads, much of the sustain comes back. We'll talk about sustain as well with transient shapers, but I decided to gate it. The exercise that we did with the 7-band, I boosted in sweeping 620, so that was the answer. Most of you got pretty close. But the goal was, if you can hear that harmonic, I actually wanted to cut it. So I did widen the bandwidth just a little bit, the Q, and I do think that that helped to reduce that ring. Sometimes I actually love that ring, but I didn't find it pleasant in this particular song. All right, so I'm going to start from the kick drum and the things that I did on the kick. I did also gate the kick drum. In terms of EQ, I decided to use the kick in to focus in on the beater, the attack of the beater. And remember, with the TDR Nova, it's going to come with the spectral analysis off. And if you look at the output, then you're at least looking at what you're doing to the signal. If I look at the in, it should be slightly different because it doesn't reflect the changes. So I decided to raise around 75 hertz just to give it some additional low end. However, I cut at 200 to allow for this boost to be a little bit more prominent, essentially. Up here at around 3000 is where I found the beater to be. So this is another example where you can just kind of sweep around. And I'm finding that beater hitting the drum head is around that spot. Now, you can narrow this in. I'm not looking for this to be too full because we have the kick out. So looking at the kick out, I also decided to gate that. So you can tell already that the kick out is a beefier sound than the kick in just because of the placement of the microphone. Now, in terms of the EQ, I did the similar boost. I want that body to come in, so we're focusing in on, the girth of the kick drum. So I boosted it around 60 hertz. I'm clicking here, sorry. So about 60 hertz. I cut again at roughly 200 to allow this to be the focal point. Here at around 1270 was really to kind of cut what might be the beater to allow this, the kick in to kind of own that zone. And then also come to just cut some of the high end. So really, it's two together. So one that might sound a little clicky and one that might sound a little body-ish together make a pretty decent kick. In addition to that, there is the sub kick that without the EQ, you still hear the snare drum. And basically, I just chose to put a low pass filter up to 800, 900 or so, really just to focus in on these sub frequencies. I don't think it needs a boost. You could play around with that, but all three of these together, pretty solid kick drum. On the snare top, again, I did gate it. I did this high mid-range cut, pretty aggressive in some respects, -9 at 620. And in terms, so this is more like, a fix-it EQ, and this additional EQ is then to kind of now build upon that. So I did, so there aren't really a lot of frequencies down here, but I did put a high pass. I could probably go above that, except that I do feel that getting much higher than that is going to get into the low mids that we want to allow for to fatten up the snare. So this area here is really to try and build up some beef in the snare drum. In this mid-range area of 650 or so, this is to cut kind of some boxiness, that cardboard sound out of the snare drum, and then everything above. So this is a shelf EQ. You do have the ability to change it back to a bell, but I kind of wanted not only to raise above 3000, but everything above that to get some air, some general sizzle and crispness to the drum. So if we listen to this bypassed, I think we have a better overall snare drum sound. On the snare bottom, we flipped the phase with this one. So this is not really doing any significant sonic processing. I decided to gate it. And on the EQ side, similar settings to the snare drum, except even a higher point for the high pass, because the snare bottom is focused primarily on, obviously, the bottom of the snare drum, the snare wires, and that crispness to fill out or to allow the snare to really cut through. I did cut at around 1100, just a little bit to get some boxiness out. I didn't want to raise too much because it's already a pretty bright signal, and whatever fatness we could get out of it, I found at around 230. So not much, but it does kind of like make it a flatter sound overall. I bailed on the snare side, so I'm in fact going to hide that, and hopefully you won't see it again. I don't find it to be a useful element in this particular recording. Overheads. Again, pretty significant low cut or high pass. That is at 250. So my goal with the overheads in this was to focus in on the cymbals and the attack of the drums. I'm not looking for body coming out of the toms or snare or anything like that. So I did go up here to roughly 760 to try and get some of that body out, mud out, the cardboardy element. I went up to about 4,000 to try and get some bite out of the cymbals, and then again I boosted 10K for more air. Now I did have a pretty high or wide Q there, but I didn't want to go with a shelf. I didn't want the cymbals to get too bright and sizzly. Let's get to a section where there's some cymbals. Let's see if I can. Let's see, overheads, somewhere around here maybe. So you can really hear that low cut. You're not hearing as much of the frequency spectrum in the kick drum for sure. Now in the toms, I applied kind of a general rule of thumb for the toms. This 200 or 130, I should say, boost is really to try and give some body to the toms. The low cut is, I'm sorry, the mid range around 700, the boxiness, and to try and raise the attack of the drum head, the drum stick hitting the head. This time I did choose to do a shelf above 5,000 because I did want as much attack as possible. On the mid tom, not that much different, except I found this mid-rangey boxiness area to be in a different place, roughly 400 as opposed to 700. And in the low tom, a couple of things where I did a fairly big boost at 80 to try and give it some girth, a significant cut at 545, and then, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Whoa, mouse, you're getting crazy on me here. Again, to try and brighten it up as much as we can. Now, what does that sound like? We got to go to a spot where all the drums are hit. And remember, I don't even know where the mid-tom gets hit. There somewhere. So toms without EQ. All right, getting those to be just a little bit brighter. And at this point, that is the general overview of the EQ on the drums.